All right. So today I will read the chapter 2. Henry and the dog and the new dog. Oh, it's come out like. Henry soon found that there was not enough wood in a bathtub crate to build a really good doghouse. As he rode around the neighborhood delivering papers, he kept his eye out for any old boxes or packing cases that he could use. There was one empty house in the neighborhood which he passed every day, hoping he would get some packing cases from the new owners, but the house remained empty. Wood was so scarce that he was about to give up the idea of a house for Ripsy when he had an unexpected piece of luck. Most of the houses in Henry's neighborhood had been built way back in the 1920s when cars were shorter and narrower than they are today. Now, many people were finding their new cars too low for their old garage, or so they built box-like additions onto the ends of their garage to make them long enough for their cars. One neighbor, Mr. Bingham, was not so fortunate. When he proudly drove his new car into his garage, he found there was no way for him to get out of it. His garage was so narrow he could not open the door of his car. So poor Mr. Bingham backed out and parked his car on the driveway. All the neighbors on Clickety Street had a good laugh over this. And Mr. Bingham announced that he was going to tear down his old garage and build a larger one. As soon as Mr. Bingham began to tear down the garage, Henry rode his bicycle over to his house to ask if he could have some of the old lumber. Sure, Henry, help yourself, said Mr. Bingham, who was praying at a board with a cupboard. Take all you want, but get it out of there before Saturday, when the truck comes to haul it away. Okay, Mr. Bingham, agreed Henry. Do you want to get rid of the windows too? Take anything you want, said Mr. Bingham. Doghouse. Would be enough lumber for a clubhouse? A clubhouse with windows, and a good one too. He would save up his paper route money and buy one of those down-filled sleeping bags he had seen in the window of the sporting goods store and sleep out in the clubhouse he would build out of all the second-hand lumber. Now Henry found himself with more to do than he had time for. He could not neglect his paper route. So he saw that he would have to have help. He told his friends Robert and Marv about the free lumber, and they saw the point at once. Sure, we will help, they both said. The boys borrowed wagons, and every afternoon between school and paper route time, they hauled lumber from Mr. Bingham's driveway to the Huggins' backyard. When Henry left to fold his papers, Robert and Marv went on hauling, and by Saturday, the boys were sure they had enough lumber for a clubhouse. Let's start building, said Henry eagerly. Nope, said Marv. When you build a house, you have got to have a plan. You can't build it any old way. Oh, Marv, said Robert, where are we going to get a plan? Henry too was skeptical. He thought that any old way was the only way to build a clubhouse. Yes, where we were going to get a plan. I can draw one, said Marv. I will do it this weekend. But remember, when you get the clubhouse built, no girls allowed. No girls allowed, vowed Henry and Robert. And when we get it built, we can sleep in it in our sleeping bags, added Henry, thinking to himself, when I get a sleeping bag. The boys agreed this was the thing to do with a clubhouse. Mrs. Huggins looked at the old lumber in her yard and said, my goodness, Henry, isn't that a lot of lumber? Don't worry, Mom, Henry assured her. The clubhouse will be real neat when we get it finished, and I will sew up the leftover boards for kindling. Mr. Higgins looked at the old lumber. I don't know about this, Henry. It looks to me as if you have taken on a pretty big job. The three of us can do it, Dad, said Henry, eager for his father's approval, and I won't let it interfere with my paper route. Cross my heart. See, that you don't, said Mr. Huggins. If you can't handle them both, you will either have to give up your route or tear down the clubhouse. That weekend, Marv, who was the smartest boy in the whole school and practically a genius, did draw a plan. He drew it on squared paper, each square equal on foot. Henry was pretty interested when he saw it and realized that Marv had been right. It would not do to build a clubhouse any old way. Marv would not hear of building the clubhouse directly on the ground. We don't want termites eating our clubhouse, he said. Henry agreed that it would not do to have bugs chewing away at their clubhouse. This meant the boys had to buy some quick mix concrete and make 4 cement blocks for their clubhouse to rest on. It was soon plain to Henry that there was more to build a clubhouse than he had realized, and that it was going to take a lot of time. That he was not sure he had a spare because of his paper route. However, he could not back out now that Robert and Marv had already worked so hard on their new project. Then one afternoon, when Henry was folding his journals on Mr. Capper's driveway with the other paper carriers, Scooter McCarthy spoke. Say, Mr. Capper, I will be needing one more paper after this, he said. Is that so? Mr. Capper sounded interested. A new subscriber? That's right, Mr. Capper. Scooter quite plainly was pleased with himself for having sold a subscription. Henry suddenly pretended to be interested in a headline in the paper he was folding because he hoped that if he did not look at Mr. Capper might not look at him. Henry was ashamed because it was already October and he had not sold a single journal subscription. Not that he hadn't tried a little bit. He really had rang several strange doorbells before he became interested in the clubhouse, and had tried to sell subscription, but the results were discouraging. Strangers had a way of listening to his sales talk about the journals, easy to read, type with amused smiles, and then saying, "No, thank you." One man interrupted with perhaps to not today and closed the door in Henry's face. A lady embarrassed him by telling him what a splendid little salesman he was, and then saying she couldn't afford to take another paper. Splendid little salesman, that was the last straw. After that, Henry found it easy to think up excuses for not trying to sell new subscription. Now, Mr. Capper was saying, "Good for you, Scooter. Suppose you tell us how you went about selling the subscription." "Oh, it was easy," boosted Scooter, stuffing his folded papers into his canvas bag. "And I just told this." Man, what a good paper the journal was. And he said he didn't have time to read because he went fishing every Saturday. And I said, "You could use it to wrap your fish eggs in." And he laughed and said, "Okay, put him down for a subscription." So I did. "I call that quick thinking on your part, Scooter," said Mr. Capper. "The rest of the boys could take a lesson from you." Out of the corner of his eye, Henry could see Mr. Capper looking around the group of boys. "What about you, Henry?" asked Mr. Capper. "You haven't turned in any subscription since you have had your root." "Well, I have been trying," Henry said, admitting to himself that he really had not tried very hard. He had been much too busy with the Clubhouse. "I know it's hard to get started sometimes," said Mr. Cappers sympathetically. "I will tell you what you do. The other day I saw a sold sign on a house on your road. When the new owners move in, you must ride up to that front door and ring the doorbell and sell them a subscription to the paper." "Yes, sir." Mr. Capper made it sound so easy. "March right up and sell them a subscription just like that." "I will try, Mr. Capper," said Henry, who knew the house the district manager was referring to. It was the house where he had once hoped to get enough old boxes to build a doghouse. It seemed a long time ago. And so each day, as Henry delivered his papers, he watched for the new owners to move into the empty house. When he finally did see packing crates and empty cartons stacked on the driveway, he decided he should give the people a little time, say about a week, to get settled before he marched right up and rang that doorbell. The next afternoon, Mr. Capper said, "Well, Henry, I see the new owners have moved into the empty house. I'm going over today as soon as I finish my route," promised Henry, knowing he could not put off a task any longer. When Henry had delivered his last paper, he hung his canvas back in the garage and washed his hands, combed his hair, and followed by Ripsy, walked the 2 blocks to call on new neighbors. He did not ride his bicycle because it seemed more businesslike to go on foot. Fuller Brush Man did not ride bicycles. As he approached the house, he whispered to himself some of the things he planned to say. "Good afternoon. I am Henry Huggins, your journal newsboy. I delivered the journal to a lot of your neighbors." That much he was sure of, but he did not know what to say next. I find a selling point. Mr. Capper always said, talk about some part of the paper that would interest a new subscriber. Henry walked more and more slowly. Ripsy finally had to sit down and wait for him to catch up. The journal had a good sports section, a good charge section. How was Henry supposed to know what would interest a new subscriber? What if he told someone about the charge section when all he wanted was to read the funny papers? But before Henry could decide what to say, he met Beatrice and her little sister Ramona. Ramona was wearing a loop of string around her neck. The ends of the string was fastened with a scotch tape to a cardboard tube. Hi, said Henry to Beatrice. What are you doing? Keeping Ramona away from the television set, answered Beatrice. Mother says she spends too much time in front of it. Ask me my name. Ramona ordered Henry. Henry could feel no enthusiasm at all for this new game of Ramona's. What's your name? He asked in a bored voice rather than risk Ramona's having a tantrum because he would not play. Ramona held the paper tube in front of her mouth. My name is Danny Fitzsimmons, she answered, looking down at the sidewalk and smiling in a self-conscious way that was not at all like a Ramona. It's not, contradicted Henry. You are not even a boy. She is just pretending. She is interviewed on the Sheriff Bud program, explained Beatrice. That's her microphone she is holding. Oh, was all Henry could find to say? My name is Danny Fitzsimmons, repeated Ramona, smiling shyly in an Ramona-like way. And I want to say hello to my mommy and my daddy and my sister Vicky, who is having a birthday, and Mrs. Richard, who is my kindergarten teacher, and Lisa Kelly, who is my best friend, and Gloria Lofton, whose cat just had kittens and she might give me one, and her dog Skipper, and all the boys and girls in my kindergarten class, and all the boys and girls at Glenwood Primary School, and Georgie Bacon's sister Angela. But I won't say hello to Georgie because I don't like him. And oh, for Pete's sake, Henry was disgusted with Ramona's new game. Why don't you just say hello to the whole world and be done with it? He had no time for this sort of thing. He was on his way to sell a journal subscription and get back to the clubhouse. So long, Beatrice, he said. Oh, Body, Brogden, who was a loose tooth, Ramona was saying as Henry went on down the street. When Henry came to the house, that was his destination. He turned to Ripsy and said, sit. Not because he expected Ripsy to sit, but because he wanted to put off ringing that doorbell a little longer. He had not decided what to use as a selling point because he could not even guess what might interest a new neighbor. Ripsy sat a moment and then got up and sniffed at the shrubbery. Shrubbery. I said, sit, Henry told his dog, deciding that it would be a good idea if Ripsy really did sit. Some people were very particular about dogs running through their flowers, and he was anxious to make a good impression. Like the good dog he was, part of the time Ripsy sat once more, but he did not stay seated. He stood up and wagged his tail. Sit, ordered Henry sternly. As he started up the steps, Ripsy appeared to think it over. Sit, Henry raised his voice. Ripsy waved his tail as if to say, do I really have to? A strange dog, a Dalmatian, came toddling around the house and began to investigate Ripsy. The dogs sit around one another and sniffing. Henry did not pay much attention. Dogs who were stranger to one another always did this. Next, a woman who was wearing an apron and had a smudge of dust on her cheek and appeared on the driveway at the side of the house. She was older than Henry's mother. Probably she was old enough to be a grandmother. Before Henry had chance to speak, the Dalmatian left Ripsy and frolicked over to his owner. Ripsy, an agreeable dog, was ready to play, followed. That was Ripsy's mistake. Now he was trespassing on Dalmatian territory, and Dalmatian began to growl deep in his throat, and he held his whip like a tail, stiff and straight, and Ripsy stopped short. This was his neighborhood. He was here first. It was the Dalmatian who was the trespassing, and each dog began to resent the other's look, sound, and smell. Ripsy Henry spoke sharply. And the woman spoke sharply too. The dogs paid no attention to their owners. Each was too intent on letting the other know exactly what he thought of him. The growls grew louder and deeper, and they raised their lips and bared their teeth as if they were sneering at each other. And just who do you think you are? Ripsy's growl seemed to say. I have just as much right here as you have, Ranger's growl answered. No, you don't, said Ripsy. I was here first. I am bigger, growled Ranger. You are a bully, and growled Ripsy. Get off my property, Ranger told Ripsy. You make me, Ripsy told Ranger. Cut it out, both of you, ordered Henry, planning to grab Ripsy's collar and drag him away. Henry jumped down from the steps to the just as the girls erupted into snarl and the dog went for each other's throat. Ranger shrieked the woman. Ripsy shouted Henry. The dog were on one another in a twisting, tumbling tangle that seemed to be made up of feet, fangs, and tails. Henry ran over to the snarling, whelping pair, and just as he was about to grab Ripsy's collar, he found the other dog's mouth in front of his hand. Quickly he drew back. He was that he could not stop the fight, and since he could not, he wanted Ripsy to win. If it had not been so important for him to sell a journal subscription, he would have yelled, "Go get him, Ripsy. Look out," shouted the woman. "Don't let him bite you." Neighbors began to gather on the sidewalk to watch the excitement. "Dogfight, dogfight," a boy yelled. The hose, shouted someone, "Turn the hose on them." "I can't," cried the new neighbor. "I don't know where it is." Hey, look at, sorry. "Hey, look at old Ripsy," said Scooter, who had ridden over on his bicycle to see what all the noise was about. "Go get him, Ripsy. You keep quiet," ordered Henry, even though he wanted to cheer his own dog on. "Your old mutt couldn't lick a sugar stove, and he could too," and said Henry hoarsely, and wasn't at all sure Ripsy could lick a Dalmatian, but he could lick a Jew, and Henry was positive of that. Who's winning set? Asked Robert, who had just arrived along with Bijas and her little sister Ramona. The new dog answered Scooter and rode on down the street, or as if the fight was already over, half afraid that Scooter might be right because the new dog was both bigger and younger than Ripsy. Henry tried once more to reach into the snarling, rolling mass of dog to grab Ripsy's collar. He did not have a chance. A man grabbed Henry by the arm and pulled him away. Don't you know that's a foolish thing to do? He demanded. Those dogs might bite you. Yes, but he's my dog, Henry tried to explain. I don't want him to get hurt. The next door neighbor was screwing the garden hose to the faucet and turned on the water and advanced toward the dogs with the gushing nozzle in hand. Stand back, everybody, he yelled and turned the full force of the hose on the dogs. Water sprayed in all directions. Still the dog snarled and snapped. The man who with the hose moved closer so that the force of the hose was stronger. The stream of the water caught Ripsy right in the face and blinded him for the moment. These gave Ranger the advantage. He seized Ripsy by the scruff of the neck, and though Ripsy was a medium-sized dog, Ranger began to shake him. The man turned the hose in Ranger's face. Ripsy wrenched free and ran dripping down the street with his tail between the legs. Dalmatian after him, then flashed black and white. Henry did not know what to do, whether to run after Ripsy and try to rescue him, or to stay and tell the woman he was sorry his dog got into a fight with her dog, even though it was her dog that started it all. He was wonder what Mr. Capper would think of all this. A fine job of marching right up and ringing the doorbell these had turned out to be. Before Henry had a chance to decide what to do, Ranger came trotting back down the street looking much pleased with himself. In the next block, Ripsy could be heard queuing toward home. Bad dog, said Roger's owner, and shaking her finger at her pet. Ranger shook himself with a great clatter of license tags, and he did not look one bit sorry, and instead he looked disapprovingly at Henry, who felt it was wise to retreat to the sidewalk. Ranger walked to the foot of the steps, flopped down, and looked around as if to say, I am monarch of all I survey. Henry was still trying to collect his thoughts and say something. How had he planned to begin his sales talk? I am Henry Huggins, your journal carrier. But what came next? Ripsy's queuing in the distance did not help Henry to think. Before Henry said anything, Ramona passed him and walked right up to Ramona's owner. Are you the new lady? Asked Ramona. Why, yes, I am, dear, answered the woman, pleased to have a little girl making friends with her so soon after she had moved into a strange neighborhood. For once, Henry was glad to see Ramona. If she talked to the lady a minute, he would have a chance to think of his sales talk once more. Ramona looked straight at the new neighbor. Remember, she said with a ferocious frown. As what? She pointed her finger. Only you can prevent forest fires, Henry groaned to himself. The lady looked startled and had no answer for Ramona. We just ran up to Ramona and grabbed her by the hand. Don't pay any attention to her, she said apologetically, and she says that to anybody because she hears it on TV so much. Smokey Bear comes on and says it between commercials. Oh, yes, the lady did not look as if she understood at all. Perhaps she did not own a television set. Come on, Ramona, we just tugged at her sister's hand. This was too much. Henry felt the only thing he could do was leave. First, his dog got into a fight with the lady's dog, and now the little sister of a friend of his particularly accused the woman of the going around setting forest fires. This was no time to sell a subscription. I'm sorry about the fight. He blurted and left quickly, followed by Bejas, who was pulling Ramona along by her hand. Remember, only you can prevent fire, Forrest, Ramona shouted back to the lady. That Ramona, thought Henry crossly. She was only 5 years old, but she was biggest pest in the neighborhood. At the corner, Henry paused to glance back. The woman was nowhere in sight, but Ranger was sitting on the front porch as if he was standing guard. It seemed to Henry that the dog was challenging him to set foot on his property. Just go ahead and try it. He seemed to say, go on, I dare you. To Henry's surprise, Mr. Capper did not ask the next day if Henry had sold a newspaper subscription to the new neighbors, and Henry suspected Mr. Capper wanted him to bring up the matter. He did not see how he could come right out and say, I didn't get that subscription because the new neighbor's dog didn't like my dog. Henry made up his mind that since he left Gypsy at home while he delivered papers, he would stop on his road this very afternoon and sell the subscription. But that time, Ramona would be home watching television, so she could not spoil his sale a second time. When all his papers were folded and stuffed into the canvas bag, Henry mounted his bicycle and zigzagged down the street, pitching journals right and left. He was wearing a different t-shirt today, and he hoped the new lady might have been so busy watching the dogfight that perhaps she hadn't noticed what he looked like. Good afternoon, he whispered to himself. I am Henry Huggins, your journal carrier. When Henry came to the house, he saw Ranger resting on the front porch and his nose on his paws, his eyes watchful. Hi, Ranger, said Henry in his most friendly manner. Ranger's answer was to jump to his feet, barking furiously, and leap down the steps after Henry. There was nothing for Henry to do but paddle down the street as fast as he could go, for the dog snarling and snapping at his right foot. Oh, every time he pushed down on the pedal. Never had Henry ridden a bicycle so fast. By the time he reached the corner, he could no longer breathe in all the air he really needed to keep him going, and each time he bore down on the paddle, he expected to lose a piece of his jeans or maybe even a piece of his foot. By the middle of the next block, Ranger suddenly stopped chasing Henry and turned around and trotted toward home with an air of having done his duty. It seemed to Henry that the dog was not even out of breath. Henry came to a stop, sat on his bicycle, and panted. Boy, that was close, but the worst of it was the Henry still had to deliver the papers in Ranger's block. When he had caught his breath, he parked his bicycle against a tree and returned on foot very, very quietly, being careful to keep out the Ranger's sight. He did not throw the papers. He laid them silently on the lawns and tiptoed away so that he would not disturb Ranger. He had curbed Ripsy from running off with newspaper by squirting a water pistol at him every time he went near a paper. But Ripsy was a good-natured dog. Henry did not think he would care to pause long enough to aim at Ranger. He might lose a leg while he aimed. He would like to see Mr. Capper march right up and ring that doorbell. He would have to wear a suit of armor or maybe even ride in a tank. And each time Henry silently laid a paper on a lawn, he became a little more angry. He had just as much right around here as that old Ranger, more because he had lived here longer, and he was a human being, not a dog. By the time Henry had finished delivering the papers in Ranger's block, he was just plain mad. He wasn't going to be pushed around by any old dog. No, sir, he was going to get that subscription if it was the last thing he did. And remembering Ranger's speed and his sharp white teeth, Henry felt that getting that subscription might very well be the last thing he did. Oh, this is the end of the chapter 2. All right, guys.